It's a Tuesday morning. Nothing special about it. You're standing at the kitchen sink, filling a glass before you head out the door. The faucet hisses. The water runs. You drink it without thinking, the same way you have 10,000 times before. But this time, something stops you. Maybe it's a faint smell, something metallic, almost chemical. Or maybe it's nothing you can name, just a quiet, nagging feeling that something isn't quite right. You shake it off. You always shake it off. Most of us do. But here's the question nobody at the water company wants you to sit with for too long. What the thing you trust most to keep your family healthy is the very thing quietly working against you. Here's what most people assume when that thought crosses their mind. They assume they're being paranoid, anxious, a little too online. And that instinct to dismiss it, that's not weakness. That's what decades of messaging have trained us to do. We've been told the system works, that the EPA tests everything, that if something were truly wrong, someone would tell us. But the system wasn't built to tell you the truth. It was built to stay legal. And legal doesn't mean safe. Legal means within limits that were set in many cases decades ago, before we understood what long-term, low-level exposure to certain compounds actually does to a human body over 30 years. I spent a long time looking into this, not as an activist, not with an agenda, just as someone who wanted to understand what was actually coming out of the tap and into my family's bodies every single day. What I found changed the way I look at water, permanently. Let me show you what I mean. Picture a family in a mid-sized American city. Nothing unusual about them. 2 kids, a mortgage, a water bill they pay without opening. Their water meets every federal standard. It tests clean. The city sends a report every year that says so in confident, official language. Then the older child starts having recurring headaches, fatigue that doesn't match his age. A pediatrician who, after ruling out everything obvious, asks a question the parents had never considered. What's your water source? The parents look into it. What they find is that their water, technically legal, technically safe, contains trace levels of chlorine byproducts called trihalomethanes, formed when chlorine reacts with organic matter in older pipes, linked in long-term studies to neurological effects in children, trace levels, legal levels, years of exposure. And the part that hits hardest? There was no dramatic moment, no brown water, no smell, no warning, just a slow, invisible accumulation in a glass that looked completely clean. This is where most people made a critical mistake. They assume that if water looks clear and tastes fine, it's fine. But contamination at the levels that concern researchers most is, almost by definition, undetectable to your senses. Here's another scenario. A woman in the Southwest, let's call her Karen, has been buying filtered bottled water for years. She made the switch after reading about her city's lead levels. She feels good about it. She's doing the responsible thing. What she doesn't know, what most people buying bottled water don't know, is that roughly 64% of bottled water in the United States is sourced directly from municipal tap supplies. Filtered, yes, repackaged, labeled with mountains and springs. But the same water. And the plastic itself? Recent peer-reviewed research has found that a single liter of bottled water contains an average of 240,000 plastic particles, many of them nanoplastics small enough to pass through cell membranes. The EPA has not yet set a legal limit for nanoplastics in drinking water. There is no standard. There is no warning on the label. Karen is spending roughly $600 a year believing she solved the problem. She hasn't. She's just paying more for a version of the same problem in a different container. What nobody tells you about bottled water is that the regulation covering it is actually weaker than tap water standards in several categories. It's tested less frequently. And because it's classified as a food product, the reporting requirements are different. One more. Think about the week of a water advisory in your city, or in a city near you. Maybe it was a boil water notice. Maybe it was a precautionary alert about PFAS compounds. Maybe it was after a train derailment or a burst main, or a summer when the reservoir ran lower than it ever had before. You run to the store. The shelves are empty. Every gallon, every case, gone. You're standing in the aisle, looking at bare shelving, and you realize, in a way you never have before, that your entire water supply depends on an infrastructure you have absolutely no control over. No backup, no alternative, no plan, just dependency. And here's what all three of these situations have in common. It's not bad luck. It's not unusual circumstances. And it is absolutely not your fault for not knowing. The common thread is a system that was designed for convenience, not safety. A system that sets its own standards, grades its own homework, and counts on the fact that most people will never look closely enough to ask the right questions. The contamination isn't always dramatic. The failure isn't always visible, but the exposure is constant. And the alternative, actually taking control of your family's water, has been made to seem either too complicated, too expensive, or too extreme to be worth considering. That framing is not an accident. After I went deep enough into this to understand what was actually happening, I stopped asking, how do I filter this better? And started asking a completely different question. What if I didn't need the system at all? That shift changed everything. Because here's something most people don't know. Water doesn't only exist underground or in reservoirs. It exists in the air around you. Right now, wherever you're sitting, the air contains measurable water vapor, humidity, in most of the continental United States, enough to produce meaningful quantities of clean, drinkable water every single day, through a process called atmospheric condensation. The technology behind it isn't new. It's the same principle the Navy has used in submarines for decades. The same recovery systems NASA developed for long-duration space missions. You cool air below its dew point, water vapor becomes liquid. You collect it, filter it, and drink it. No pipes, no municipal source, no chemical treatment required. The water that comes out of this kind of system doesn't carry chlorine byproducts because no chlorine was added. It doesn't carry lead because it never traveled through aging municipal pipes. It doesn't carry whatever is upstream of your treatment facility. It comes from the air directly around your home, condensed, collected, clean. Remember that family dealing with unexplained headaches? A system like this removes the source of problem entirely. Not by filtering what's in the tap, but by bypassing the tap completely. Remember Karen, spending $600 a year on bottled water that's mostly just repackaged municipal supply in plastic? This approach eliminates that cost in the first year. The hardware, built from parts available at any hardware store, runs on standard electricity and requires no ongoing chemical inputs. Remember standing in an empty store aisle during a water advisory? A working atmospheric system in your home produces water regardless of what's happening to the municipal supply. It's not affected by a broken main. It doesn't know there's a drought advisory. It pulls from the atmosphere, which hasn't been shut off. I put together a complete system, the exact approach I use, with step-by-step build instructions, a full materials list, and safety protocols for long-term water storage. I've shared it with homesteaders in Arizona, single parents in Texas, retired couples in the Pacific Northwest who wanted to stop worrying about what their utility company wasn't telling them. The results aren't miraculous. They're just consistent. And in this context, consistency is everything. I know what some of you are thinking right now. I'm not an engineer. I've never built anything like this. I don't even own a proper tool set. Fair. That was my first thought too. But the reason this system was originally designed for simplicity isn't philosophical, it's practical. Astronauts in orbit can't call a plumber. Sailors on a submarine can't run to Home Depot. The tech had to be buildable, fixable, and maintainable by people with basic tools and a willingness to follow clear instructions. I've watched a retired mechanic in Tucson build this system in a single weekend using parts salvaged from an old dehumidifier and a window AC unit. He hasn't bought a case of bottled water in 6 months. I've watched a single mom in Waco complete the build over 2 weekends with her brother's help. Her son had been breaking out in skin rashes after bathing. Rashes that cleared up within 3 days of switching to the new water source. Neither of them had engineering backgrounds. Neither of them had specialized tools. What they had was a clear set of instructions and a reason to follow through. The reason this works at its core is that it removes the variable you can't control, the source, and replaces it with one you can. If nothing changes, 6 months from now looks a lot like today. The water bill arrives. You pay it without opening it. The kids drink from the tap. You buy your case of bottled water at the warehouse store. And somewhere in the back of your mind, that quiet unease is exactly where it's always sat. Not urgent enough to act on, just present enough to bother you. But if something changes, if you spend 1 weekend building a system that takes your family's water off the municipal grid, 6 months from now looks different in a specific, practical way. You know what's in your water, not because you're trusting a report, because you built the source yourself. You're not anxious during the next boil water advisory. You're not cleaning out a shelf at the grocery store. You're not explaining to your kid why the tap smells like a swimming pool this week. You've already done the hard part. You've been paying attention, asking questions, looking for a real answer. The only thing missing was a system that actually matched the effort you've been putting in. Every glass of water you've poured without thinking about it. That's not ignorance. That's trust. And trust in a system that hasn't always earned it isn't a character flaw. It's just where most of us started. The difference between where you were at the beginning of this and where you are now is just information. And information, once you have it, tends to move in one direction. If you want to see the exact system and step-by-step guide I referenced, the full build instructions, materials list, and water storage protocols, I left a link in the description below. If this gave you something to think about, hit subscribe. Drop a comment with your city if you've ever had a water advisory. You might be surprised how many people in the community have the same story. Take care of your family. That's all any of us are really trying to do.